as the Mono Basin Historical Society is pleased to bring you the Reno Cure.
I love you, Vivian.
I knew you were coming. I would have put on a bigger pot. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Well, holy smokes and howdy. How nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. I'm Clive Sterling, and along with my wife, Vivian here, we work at the Silver Sage Guest Ranch here in Washoe Valley. Vivian and I met there while we were working back in the 1940s. And after a few years, we decided to get married. And here in 1961, well, we still work at the Silver Sage, but we're not sure for how much longer, because business certainly isn't what it used to be. It's fallen off in the last couple of years, and we're not sure just how much longer the owners are going to be able to keep the guest ranch open. Well, I started at the Silver Sage there in 1946.
And I started there in 1948, a couple years after I moved to Reno.
I was born and raised in Reno, living outside of town on a cattle ranch where my father was the foreman. Heck, by the time I started high school, having grown up around cattle and horses, I was a full-fledged cowboy, and I'd work right alongside of my father there at the ranch on the weekends and during the summer months. And then World War II broke out. I served my country faithfully for 3 years, came back, and work wasn't that easy to find. I came back to Reno, and there weren't that many jobs, and I ended up going back to the ranch, living with my parents and being a cowboy. But I had been to Europe. I had drank French wine with French women. I didn't want to live at home with my parents again. Well, a few weeks later, I was downtown Reno at the Harold's Club with a friend of mine having a few beers. And he let me know that he had heard of an opening for a wrangler at a guest ranch about 20 miles south of town, down in the Washoe Valley. Well, I went down there the very next day. I borrowed my dad's Ford Super Deluxe, and I went down to the Silver Sage Guest Ranch where I met the owners, Edward and Ruth Billingsley, two of the nicest people you might ever hope to meet. They told me what the job was to be a wrangler there, to take care of the stable of horses that they maintained there at the Silver Sage. They supposed to get up in the morning, feed them, groom them, clean out their stalls, care for them, and then put saddles on a few and wait to stand at ready in case a few of the guests at the ranch wanted to go on rides through the nearby trails and forest and mountains. Well, I told Edward and Ruth I wanted that job, and they hired me on the spot right then.
Well, I was raised a city girl in Indiana, and I didn't know better, and I married my high school sweetheart when I was just 17. It wasn't the worst marriage, but Earl had his idea of what a wife should be, and I had my own. Well, when the war broke out, Earl joined the Navy, and we were apart for the next 3 years, during which time I got myself a job, had my own money, and figured out I was quite capable of taking care of myself. And I really enjoyed my independence. So when Earl returned, I was not ready to go back to business as usual. I've grown up a lot in those 3 years, and I wasn't willing to have him order me around anymore. We argued continually. And one day I said, I want a divorce, he told me over his dead body. Well, I thought about it for a while. I thought better not. I had heard you could get a quickie divorce in Reno, Nevada if you could get yourself there. So I started squirreling a little bit of my grocery money away every week for the next couple months. And one bright sunny day after Earl left for work, I packed a bag, grabbed the $95 I'd saved, left a note saying, gone to Reno, kissed my mom goodbye, and boarded the train to Reno. Well, when I got off that train in Reno, I had never been west before. And when I saw those mountains, I was taken aback. Well, sorry. Taken aback. And I asked the baggage handler if he knew where I might get a cheap room. And he pointed me down the road to the Truckee River boarding house, where he said I could get a room for $8 a week that included breakfast and use of the kitchen. I marched right down there and told that boarding house manager, I'm here to get a divorce and I need a room. She goes, honey, I'll show you the ropes and I'll even be your resident witness. And next morning I got up, went downtown, got myself an attorney and a job at the Woolworth's Five and Dime right there downtown. So I started my 6-week waiting period. And when I got my degree in my hand and walked out of that Washoe County courthouse, I was kicking my heels. I had never been happier in my life. You know, and Reno had really grown on me and I made quite a few friends, and the job was good at Woolworths, and so I stayed living at the boarding house for a while until I got the job at the Sage a couple years later. I'll tell you more about that later.
So the Silver Sage and other similar guest ranches are often referred to by people as divorce ranches. They're called that because a sizable percentage of the clientele that would stay with us had come to Reno to get a legal dissolution to their marriage. Why were people coming to Reno at that time to get a divorce, you might ask? Well, that's a very interesting story. Let me enlighten you. In Nevada, here, we have always been on the progressive side of things. Way back when we first became a state in 1864, the Constitution said that you only had to reside in Nevada for just 6 months in order to be considered a legal resident and enjoy all the legal benefits that provided for you. And it also, at that time, when the state was first created, provided for fairly broad grounds for divorce. In other states, you might have to be a resident for a whole year until you could actually be considered a resident of that state and take court action and other things. So, as Reno continued to grow into a real town by the early 1900s, enough people had found it beneficial, whether they lived in New York or Cleveland or Miami, to make the long trip to Reno and live for 6 months so they could get a divorce a lot quicker than they might be able to get it back in their hometown back east somewhere. Enough people had come west to do that one East Coast newspaper dubbed Reno the new divorce capital of the world. In 1907, the president of U.S. Steel, one of the biggest corporations in America, came to Reno to get a divorce from his wife. Well, that was front page headlines throughout the country, and Reno's notoriety of being an easier place to get a divorce took off. That wasn't until 1913. Oh, there was a few progressive-minded state legislators there in Carson City that claimed that the fledgling Nevada divorce industry was creating us a bad reputation and for society in general. And they got the residency requirement changed to an entire year. Well, you can imagine what happened. The divorce industry in Reno had collapsed. Divorce attorneys, businesses that were involved in taking care of the temporary residents were up in arms about it. Fortunately, 2 years later, the next time the state legislature met, there was a few wise members of the legislature that were able to get rid of that ridiculous law, and the 6-month residency returned. Things continued to go well. After World War I, a few other states thought they could maybe start to compete with Nevada. So we lowered our residency requirement down to just 3 months. And throughout the 1920s, the divorce industry did very well, especially in Reno, by far Nevada's biggest town. That was up until 1929 when the Great Depression hit the country. I don't think there was an occupation or an industry that wasn't severely affected by that economic collapse. Here in Nevada, we had always depended on mining ever since our existence as the dynamo that powered our economic engine. And ever since Tonopah and Goldfield finally declined in the late 19-teens, even that hasn't been going so well. In the 1930 census, the entire state of Nevada only had 90,000 people in it. After the Depression hit, people were starting to leave the Silver State in droves. If something wasn't done to halt the flow of people, the entire state faced a near complete economic collapse. Well, on March 16th of 1931, the good folks there at the Capitol passed legislation that they sent on to Governor Fred Balzar, and he signed it, which legalized a few card games and dice games as being legal in Nevada. The very next day, an operation called the Bank Club opened there on 2nd and Center Street, and Nevada was off. To a lot of people in Reno, the fact that gambling was now legal, it didn't seem like all that big a deal. Gambling had been going on in the back rooms of speakeasies and private clubs forever. But the fact that there was now a legitimacy to it and you could walk in the front door of a business, it actually started to bring some people, especially those from the Bay Area that still had some money after the Depression had hit. They were starting to come to Reno to try their hand at legalized lady luck. But there was another piece of legislation that very same day that the legislature passed and sent on to Governor Balzar that he signed into law. And that was the time required to become a resident in Nevada to get a divorce was lowered to just 6 weeks. And hand in hand with that was a broadening and loosening of the regulations regarding matrimony. The legislature completely removed the need for a blood test, along with any waiting period whatsoever from the time you got divorced till the time you got remarried. Some states had 6 months, even a year's waiting time after you got divorced until you could get married. But not Nevada. There were lots of cases where people would bring their future spouse with them for the 6 weeks residency in Reno. Tales abound of people getting divorced, their divorce decree in the morning, and getting tied the knot to somebody else that very same afternoon, sometimes officiated by the same judge. And to go along with the lowering of the residency was a further broadening of the regulations regarding grounds for divorce. In most other states, the only grounds that you could bring the court to get divorced was adultery. And you often had to bring a witness with you to court.
Don't know how that worked.
Well, in Nevada, not only was adultery grounds for divorce, but so was insanity, desertion, if your spouse was a habitual drunkard. And then there was a broad catch-all called mental cruelty. Mental cruelty, the evidence that you could bring to court to claim that was pretty easy. If your spouse was argumentative, stayed out late, quarrelsome, or generally any kind of behavior that contributed to the plaintiff's unhappiness. At that time, 90% of the court cases of divorce in Nevada claimed mental cruelty.
I knew a young woman from Ohio, and her testimony claiming mental cruelty said her husband didn't allow her to listen to the radio station of her choice, and the judge granted her the divorce.
Before I met Vivian, I met a client at the Silver Sage. We went out to dinner. She'd come to Reno to get a divorce, and over dinner, I asked her, well, what was the story with you? And she said, well, her husband and her were getting a divorce because of religious differences. I thought, oh, my. And she went on to say that, yeah, she said her husband thought he was God, and she didn't. Well, with the lowering of the residency requirement to just 6 weeks and the broadening for the grounds of divorce, there in the early 1930s, the Reno divorce industry exploded. During the 1930s, the population of Reno was only 18,000 people. And during that decade, 30,000 divorces were granted at the Washoe County Courthouse. And then in 1946, the first year after World War II, 19,000 divorces were granted in 1 year in Washoe County. That's over 70 every day that the courthouse was open. With a flood of temporary 6-week residents coming to Reno, well, at first, a lot of people in Reno simply moved out of their homes in with relatives and rented out their houses to the new people that were coming. Others just sought spare rooms in people's homes, and there were a few motor hotels in the town at that time. But a housing boom started. Soon, luxury apartments and hotels appeared on the scene to take care of those that had come to Reno that had the means to pay for them. The incredible, beautiful Riverside Hotel right there on the south bank of the Truckee. Down a little further to the east, the El Cortez. And then a few years later, that beautiful Mapes Hotel appeared there on the north side of the Truckee River. And if you didn't have the means to pay for these fancy hotels, well, there were motor hotels, and what were they called, Vivian? Motor camps and boarding houses like Vivian lived in early that would be able to take care of guest needs.
I knew one enterprising young woman who spent her 6-week residency in the county jail, courtesy of the taxpayers.
Some residents found it, like I said, quite lucrative to move out of their homes and rent their entire home to one of these 6-week residents. And I knew a lot of folks that had done that. When they returned to their houses after 6 weeks, they had found that those temporary residents had completely redecorated their homes with beautiful furnishings that they left for these owners as well. But soon enough, another 6-week housing option appeared on the scene. At that time, Reno was still a pretty strong western town, and there were a number of dude ranches on the outskirts of town. Now, dude ranches at that time, they pretty much catered to city dwellers that wanted to get away from their urban environments for a week or two during their vacations and come live the life of a western dude for a few weeks. Well, some of these places started offering themselves as an option for the 6 weeks residents. And because they were on the edge of town, the remote location and the austere setting that they usually provided It really provided the perfect place for those that had come to Nevada to get a divorce, that wanted to stay out of that shining publicity spotlight that shone on everybody that was in downtown Reno and the accompanying hoi polloi that went with it.
And maybe find a little adventure.
So these became known as divorce ranches. And at their peak, there was over 25 of them in the greater Reno area. Oh, let's see, north of town, there was the Pyramid Lake Guest Ranch. Heading out US 40 west towards Sacramento, there was the Donner Trail Guest Ranch out at Verdi. Not far from us, where we work in the Washoe Valley, probably the most famous of all, and our neighbor there, the Lazy M.E., with quite a reputation around it as well. Well, the divorce industry did great.
Their residency?
And the resident, yes, thank you for that, Vivian. And the divorce ranches could also provide another important needed bit you had to have to get a divorce in Nevada. Even though it was easy, you could come and make residence for 6 weeks and get a divorce. There was one part of this judicial system that was very serious. When you came to court after your 6 weeks, you had to bring somebody with you that could say in court under oath that they had seen you every day for the previous 6 weeks. And the judge took this very serious. If the judge found that a witness had come in and perhaps perjured themselves, you could face 3 years in jail for that. Well, the divorce ranches, being smaller with a small staff, they could almost always have somebody there, a wrangler, a cook, housekeeper, the owner, that could go to court with you and attest to that fact, compared to the big hotel or the comings and goings of the busboys and bellmen and waitresses. It might be a little harder thing to do.
Well, let's face it, there was a very serious emotional aspect to the whole divorce business. When I moved to Reno, I knew no one. And the support and friendship I received from the boarding house manager and the other divorce seekers there was invaluable to me. I always try to take a personal interest in the women that come to the ranch because I know the value of having a friend, someone you can talk to, cry with, just give you a little support when you're going through such a trying time as a divorce.
I'll tell you, many of the divorce seekers that came to Reno during that time, they were surprised and relieved to find that their rather difficult current matrimonial situation was met with such a high degree of openness and support. I knew many women and Vivian that provided a great social community, primarily for these women that had come to Reno. How many dances, Vivian, have you arranged in the last several years? Dozens. Card games, outings to Mono Lake and other places as well. It was a very important service that these people did for complete strangers that had come to Reno.
Women by far were the majority who came to Reno for a divorce. Many were sent there by their husbands. Many came on their own. Lots of them had their children with them, and some of the women were even came pregnant. Over the years, I cared for many of the children while their mothers worked, played, and took care of other business.
Children of residents of Reno got used to the fact that a lot of their classmates would only be with them for 6 weeks and then gone. Well, in the 1930s, as the divorce business continued to grow, Reno divorce, literally, it became ingrained in American culture. All you had to do was tell someone, I'm going to Reno, and the message was clear. The Reno divorce, it became a sight gag and a plot line for numerous Hollywood movies. The object of poetry, the topic of novels, and the subject of hundreds of newspaper articles and magazines as well. It was a pretty important thing in that state during that time. So, the Reno divorce industry, it developed its own lingo. Reno became a divorce mill where you would come to take the Reno cure, or as that gossip columnist Walter Winchell called it, to be renovated. Certain locations in Reno, they became elevated to national divorce landmarks. The Washoe County Courthouse, where most of the divorces were granted, people started referring to it as the House of Divide or the Great Separator. In 1937, the biggest circulation magazine in the country, Life magazine, came to Reno and did an article about Reno divorce. And on its front cover is a nice-looking young woman dressed in a nice business suit. She's standing on the Washoe County Courthouse steps, and she is firmly implanting a kiss on one of the marble columns, signifying the fact, leaving her lip print of having just been granted her divorce at the courthouse. And then, just a block north of the courthouse, right across the Truckee River, was the Virginia Street Bridge, which was the site of some women that would march out of the courthouse, walk down to the bridge, take their wedding ring off, and toss it in to the Truckee River.
I can attest, working at Woolworths, only a block from the bridge, did see people throwing something over into the river. But I can also tell you that many of the women came in and bought costume jewelry wedding rings and told me they were taking the real one down to the pawn shop and throwing the cheap imitation symbolically into the river.
Yep. Despite the fact Reno still being a fairly small town, it truly was a cosmopolitan city, thanks greatly to that divorce industry. In fact, that cosmopolitan nature of it led to the slogan that we still go by today, the biggest little city in the world. There was no place like Reno, Nevada in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And the Hollywood movie studios figured that out as well. They started coming up to make movie after movie about Reno divorce. The Merry Wives of Reno, The Road to Reno, 6 Weeks in Reno, and The Reno Cure. And then just a few weeks ago, here in '61, was released what might become the most popular of all movies ever about Reno, and that was The Misfits. It featured some real Hollywood heavyweights. Marilyn Monroe, Clark Gable, Eli Wallach, and Montgomery Clift all appeared in that movie. Vivian and I saw it down at the Majestic there over on 4th. It was a great movie. So the Monroe character, she had come to Reno to get a divorce in 6 weeks. But the overall theme of the movie actually centers more around a disappearing West in a modern and changing world. Vivian and I enjoyed the movie greatly. There's many wonderful on-location scenes of both downtown Reno and on the edge of town as well. But let me caution you about something before you go see it yourself. Vivian and I, we love our state's wild Mustangs. They're very important to us and something we hold in great regard. Oh, there's one particular scene in the movie that's a little bit harsh, especially if you enjoy Mustangs as well, in the treatment of them back during the filming of that movie. Coincidentally, it's the last movie that Clark Gable ever made. 2 days after filming, he passed away. Well, as I mentioned earlier, my job there at the Silver Sage was to get up early, and I took it serious. Get up early, feed the horses, clean out their stalls, groom them, take care of other needs with the horses, and then put saddles on them and get them ready should any of the guests want to go on a trail ride that morning with me. I also acted as the driver, the primary driver there of the ranch. If any of our guests wanted to go into town, shop, or go by the casino, see their attorney, do some business, I would take them in the ranch wagon and drive them on into town. And of course, many of the people that stayed with us, especially some of the women, well, they got thirsty and they wanted to occasionally go out and enjoy a beverage at a local watering hole, which I also would do and act as their driver, going primarily to Carson City, sometimes Virginia City, and Reno was a little bit farther, but we would occasionally go there as well. Yeah, a lot of these ladies, they enjoyed their beverages and, of course, the company and companionship, maybe a little dancing with some of the male patrons. We called them the alley cats. They were a good bunch of girls. So there at the ranch, especially at the Silver Sage, our staff wasn't all that big. So what that meant was every night, the staff would eat dinner with the guest. Well, over time, I can tell you, I met some very, very interesting people, especially over dinner, where the conversation was always lively and entertaining and sometimes even a bit intimate. The Billingsleys, the owner of the Silver Sage, they emphasized to all the staff that we were there to take care of the guests and to offer exceptional customer service, no matter what our job might be, to be friendly, professional, and welcoming, and to be sure we took care of the guests' every need. Well, I can tell you that over the times there was a few of the women I met that were indeed a bit needy. And well, I did my best to fulfill that part of my job. You could say that working at the Silver Sage was a young man's dream come true.
Clive, I think you're playing arrogant, and it seems like you're winning again. Well, the rents kept going up at the boarding house, and my wages at Woolworths weren't keeping up. I was taking free swim lessons at the Moana Springs Plunge. And one day after class, I was complaining to another young woman there that I was finding it really hard to make ends meet. Well, she told me she was leaving her job the following week to marry a young man she had met. She worked at the Silver Sage Guest Ranch, where she did some housekeeping and cooking. And she said the wages were fair and you got a small cabin. A small cabin? And your meals were included. She said, why don't you give them a call? I went straight home, got on the phone, and called the Billingsleys, and they hired me right on the spot to work the following week.
A week later there in 1948, when the cab carrying the new arrival pulled up, I went right on over to help the new arrival with her luggage. When I opened the back door of that taxi cab and I first saw Vivian, she was so beautiful, she rocked me back on my heels. She's like a car accident. I just couldn't look away.
Well, when I first met Clive, I was reminded that women can often make fools of men. And many of them are the do-it-yourself type.
Well, Vivian let me know right away she was there to work, and she wasn't the least bit interested in getting to know me any better. So I went back to focusing my hospitality on our guests, especially the younger female ones.
And the not so young ones.
Well, it seems like American culture has always been fascinated and interested in the comings and goings and doings of celebrities, actors, socialites, captains of industry. And the Reno divorce industry was no exception to that interest among the American public. Or early on in the 1920s, before even the 6-week residency had started. Cornelius Vanderbilt V, the heir to the fabulous Vanderbilt fortune. Well, he came to Reno to get what ended up being the first of his 5 divorces that he got in Nevada over the years. After he got his divorce, Reno had grown on him. He decided to stick around for a while. Vanderbilt had a background in journalism, and he started writing numerous syndicated articles for magazines and newspapers about the Reno divorce industry. And then Vanderbilt built his divorce ranch there in the Washoe Valley down from us. He said he wanted to attract an elite clientele. He took his Wranglers, he dressed them up in rhinestone studded shirts, gave them 10-gallon hats. The cowboys would drive Rolls Royces down to the train station there in Reno to pick up the new arrivals and bring them back to the ranch. A few years later, America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford, she came to Nevada. She actually lived in a residence in Genoa. After her time, she got her divorce decree granted there at the Douglas County Courthouse in Minden. Within days after little Mary, got her divorce, she married Douglas Fairbanks Jr. That was sensationalized news that the 2 big Hollywood actors had gotten divorced and married again. She had got her divorce and got married to a big Hollywood actor like that.
Love goddess Rita Hayworth spent her 6-week residency in a private residence in Glenbrook at Lake Tahoe. During her stay there, she had brought her 2 children with her, and she got word that underworld figures were going to kidnap her children. They assigned bodyguards to stay with her the rest of her residency.
Douglas County at that time only had 2,000 people. They didn't have enough law enforcement to help Miss Hayworth. So fortunately, the chief of police in Reno, the biggest town, sent some of his officers up there to be year-round guards for her during the rest of her time there. By the 50s, it seemed like a long line of people were forming to come to Reno to take the cure. 3 of President Franklin Roosevelt's children came to Nevada to get a divorce. Then the wife of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller. There was that Hollywood actor, Olympic gold medal swimmer, star of the Tarzan movies, Johnny Weissmuller. He came to Reno to get his divorce. Playwright Arthur Miller, who actually wrote the screenplay for The Misfits, specifically for Marilyn Monroe, that he ended up marrying after he got a Reno divorce. Oh, and then there was that author of that very famous self-help book, Dale Carnegie, added to the list of divorce seekers in Reno.
I guess he wasn't able to win everyone over as a friend.
I guess not, Vivian. I guess not. Well, still, Reno was growing, but still a relatively small town. It had a fairly condensed and centralized business district. So what that meant was, whether you had all the money in the world and president of a Fortune 500 company, or maybe on a limited income as a school teacher from Cleveland, Ohio, well, you probably trod the same economic and social circles no matter your financial status. You could be sitting at a blackjack table alongside anyone, taking the same outings to the beach at Lake Tahoe and sharing the sand with them as well.
But if you need to finance your stay, there were many job opportunities in Reno, especially in the casinos. The Herald's Club, the owner, Pappy Smith, had started hiring women during World War II, and they were very readily accepted by the public. Soon, 90% of the casino floor employees were women.
6 weeks might seem a short time in judicial sense, but if you didn't have money, it could seem like a very long time. If you had money, maybe it was considered an extended vacation, but for those, they had to work. And fortunately, there were jobs available for many of them. I know I certainly enjoyed less losing money at the blackjack table to a nice looking young woman as opposed to some cranky old man, Vivian. Well, probably the most noteworthy of all the people that were involved in the judicial system there at Washoe County in the time was Judge George Bartlett. He was actually a native Nevadan, born and raised there in Reno. He was known to be very compassionate, very caring, and very kind, and very understanding. He understood that a lot of people needed to have a relatively easy path to get out of their marriage and not have to jump through all the legal hurdles that they might have to do so back at home. During the 20 years Judge Bartlett served on the Washoe County bench, he granted over 20,000 divorces and almost double that in the number of marriages as well. Well, after a period of time there at the Silver Sage, I think I finally started to grow on Vivian a little bit. She would sometimes go with me in the ranch station wagon when I would go into town to pick up some of the new arrivals, and I would take her on the shopping trips to the cash and carry there in downtown where she would buy supplies for the ranch.
The Billingsleys were getting on in age, and they had bought themselves a small home in Carson City. And they came to me and asked if I would manage the ranch a couple days a week in their absence. I told them I'd be delighted to.
Yeah, I thought Vivian did a pretty good job being the boss.
You mean bossy?
Well, I don't know if it was because I was getting on in age, but I just didn't start to have the same interest anymore in taking care of our guests' every need. And the more I knew Vivian, the more smitten I became with her. After a few years, I finally convinced her to go out on a date. It was going to be a casual affair up to Lake Tahoe on a fishing trip. I purposely watched the weather report until I saw there was a storm coming in with high winds. Sure enough, the day we drove up there with our little 14-foot skiff and I launched it, it bobbed in Big Blue's waters like a kid's top. Vivian became alarmed, and she was concerned that possibly our little boat would be capsized.
Well, I let Clive comfort me in his big, strong arms.
Well, that began our courtship, and I courted Vivian with great enthusiasm for the next several months. And then finally, I proposed us that we get married.
And I said yes.
And we've worked at the Silver Sage ever since. But as I mentioned earlier, here in 1961, other states are starting to loosen up their own laws and regulations regarding divorce. In the last couple of years, business has fallen off a great deal. We're not sure how much longer the Billingsleys are going to be able to keep the Silver Sage open. So a few years ago, Vivian and we bought some acreage and a small house down in the Carson Valley. And if the Billingsleys ever do close the Silver Sage, we could do a little cattle ranching, we figure. Well, Vivian and I will always remember fondly our time working in the Reno divorce industry and our small but very important contribution that we feel we've made. There have been many, many people that have given of their hearts, their minds, even their pocketbooks to help complete strangers who had come to Nevada and Reno during a rather challenging time in their life, helping them get through a pretty difficult process in their life, that hopefully allowed them to have a much better life. Vivian and I want to thank you very much for allowing us to wax and reminisce nostalgically with you today. And if any of you ever need a little advice how to best seek your own Reno cure, come look us up. Thank you so much.
Wow. These two are amazing. They have been coming and looking us up every year with some different presentation for years now. And we just love them. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
You want to take questions?
Is there time?
Sure. Anybody have any questions?
Questions about Reno divorce? And
need to do it on the mic so the people at home can. How many are at home? How many are Zooming? 15. Okay, pretty good crowd. Nobody?
So, Dave, do you think that Nevada, when they passed that law to make it a lot easier with the residency, did they anticipate what was going to happen?
I don't think they anticipated the scale of it, but it certainly was passed as one of the ways we got to do something to stop this flow of people leaving the state. So gambling, which was promoted primarily by Reno, had underworld figures, Jim McKay and Bill Graham, and even though people don't like to say this, George Wingfield. They were all crooks. 2 of them went to jail for it. They passed the gambling thing. It broadened out from there with the divorce. I don't think they really thought it was going to become what it did. There was 5 times the revenue in the 30s and 40s and even into the early 50s that Nevada was garnering from divorces than they were from people coming to gamble. You know, big casinos didn't come about until the late 50s and early 60s, and even those weren't very big. If you filed for divorce in Washoe County in 1947, it was $450. That's a ton of money. Washoe County, 70 every day that they're raking in. The attorneys, which was a normal fee as suggested by the American Bar Association, was $350. So it was easy, but it wasn't necessarily cheap. And then you add in living for 6 weeks at a boarding house, at a hotel, at the fancy Riverside Hotel, and have your maid live next door. It generated a huge amount of money. And I don't think they probably fully appreciated just how much it was going to, but it certainly outdid gaming for the first couple of decades after they both came about. Yes, sir. So
the question was, people at home can't hear. So.
Do you know if the non-resident spouses were able to contest the divorce?
Yes, I do. And I actually left out a small part of the program. Thank you for reminding me of that. No, I'm glad you did. So you could contest it. If there wasn't children and there wasn't a great deal of assets, you probably were out of luck. There's a thing called in the U.S. Constitution, the full faith and credit clause. And it requires all the states to recognize and respect the laws of all the other states. So there were court challenges at times that would come up, but if there wasn't children, custody and all that, or a large amount of assets, every time the divorce that had been granted in Nevada was held to be legal. If there were kids and money, people pretty much knew that's not going to work to go to Nevada. We're going to have to stay there in Cleveland and battle it out in court there. They didn't, for the most part, come to Reno to actually do it. A lot of men that would get mistresses or just be respectful of their wives, if it wasn't mistresses, they'd send their wives. They had to stay working in Detroit or Charlotte or Memphis or wherever they came from. So they sent the wife with the kids. So that was why there was one of the reasons there was such a high percentage of women that were making up the divorce industry there. The man would give them the money, tell them go there, get the divorce. And it was thought that, you know, it was more respectful of the woman, that her husband wasn't divorcing her, that she was actually the one divorcing her. So there's an interesting side note on that. Other states, they didn't have that full faith in, I'm sorry, other countries didn't have that full faith and credit clause. So other countries didn't have to recognize that. And there's a case in the 1930s that a member of the English House of Lords, Lord Earl Russell, came to Reno, got a divorce in 6 weeks, turned around right away and married his sweetheart, his mistress, Molly Summerfield, with him at a nice ceremony there at the Riverside Hotel on the banks of the Truckee River. He goes back to England. England says, we don't recognize Nevada divorce. You've committed bigamy, and we're going to charge you and take you to court. He was tried and convicted. He ended up serving 3 months in an English prison for having committed bigamy by marrying his mistress there in Nevada.
Oh, about your performances is what my question is. How many do you do? How often do you do?
So we have 7 different. This is called living history because we are fictive characters. We're based on real people, but it's made up because we don't want to be one of those persons that work there. For one thing, the wife of the character we built the man character around here, she's still alive. And just out of respect to her husband, I don't want to get something wrong, you know, either. So we took all the history of divorce, we took the social aspects together, you know.
Actually, it's things that happened. Those things did happen places.
All of it. So,
yeah.
So this is living history. We also do Chautauqua, where we actually assume a historical character. So of those 2 kind of things, we do 7 of them. And then we have 17 slideshows that are oriented from Death Valley to Lake Tahoe and pretty heavy on the Eastern Sierra stuff.
Are you going to be at it's working still?
Yeah.
Are you going to be at
The history
Eastern
conference in
Sierra?
October? We are.
Yeah, every year. Yeah.
We're going to portray Death Valley Scotty, the man that is often credited with building Scotty's castle, but he didn't. It wasn't his money. And Gayle is going to play the wife of their benefactor, which was Albert Johnson, and his wife, Bessie, who was, you should come see the program. She was devoutly religious. Scotty was the worst con man, liar, BSer there ever was. And yeah, it's a pretty interesting program, but that's what we're going to do. We do programs a lot. Since January 1st, this is our 81st program this year. We do 3 every month at the Minden Mill in Minden. So that's kind of a regular job, but if anybody asks us to do one, I have a very hard time saying no. We live in Gardnerville now, and we went to Ridgecrest back in April, and we go to Death Valley usually twice a year to do programs. And we love coming to the Mono Basin.
And you won't take any help with the hotel room or any money. He says we want everything to come to the society. And that reminds me of something I didn't announce earlier. But can we thank these guys, please? Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And Silver Sage, no. There was the Washoe Pines, which was the smaller of the 2 guest ranches in the Washoe Valley. So we based it around the Washoe Pines, but no, there's a lot of people still alive that are tied to that, and we just didn't feel comfortable trying to be somebody that's still alive. You know, it was just not. So the history is all correct. Some of the social things, well, they probably happened, you know, between man and woman, and they did. The character I based it around, he met his wife there at the Silver Sage. So at the Lazy ME. So Gayle and I want to thank all of you for being supportive of the Mono Basin Historical Society. We do a lot of programs for a lot of small town museums and historical societies. I know really well, and so does Gayle, the importance these places play in keeping our wonderful history relevant and archived. If it wasn't people that donate their time, Rich and David and Janet and everybody else here, and the members that support it with their membership and donations, our history would just fade away. It would be gone. Teddy Roosevelt said, it's only by understanding our past that we can be prepared to meet our future. Next time somebody tells you that history isn't that important, tell them bullshit. It's vitally important.
I love it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Last thoughts, and then we'll turn you loose. I forgot to mention this quilt. I hope you all noticed as you came in the door. It's a queen size. That's only half of it showing. It's a queen size quilt made by the June Lake Women's Club back in the 70s, and kept and treasured, and we're re-raffling it this year. And we have tickets. You can buy a ticket for $1. You could win this quilt. But I got to tell you, somebody in this room bought $40 worth of tickets. So you can get 5 tickets for, or you can get 6 tickets for $5. So if you want to do that, don't leave just without taking care of that. We'll take care of you. There's a donation jar over here. And, we hope you'll continue to support the Mono Basin Historical Society. Yes. Steve Moore wanted to know, he's zooming in, when is the Eastern Sierra History Conference? And it's the last week of October, 28th maybe, 26th and 27th. So it's Friday and Saturday, 25th and 26th. And that's when these guys will be performing, but also the lots of things go on there, and they hold it down at the Saracosa College down in Bishop. Thank you. Glad you came.